Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, the Emmy Award winning lead sports anchor for Fox 61, Jonah Karp. Jonah, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks for having me, Chase. Good to be here.
I'm so glad you are able to be here. It's great to have this conversation. You do so many great things in the world of sports media. We speak with a lot of people in the sports media world, and you're just going to add such a unique perspective covering sports in Connecticut. We're so happy to have you on. When did you realize you even wanted to be a sports anchor, and what has been your career path since to get to the point where you're at now?
I came to that realization, I would say in high school. I our high school had a radio station, and I joined as a DJ covering 70s classic rock with my best friend Jesse.
Love it.
And on Monday nights, we would go into the radio station at 9 p.m. and we would do that. And then I really wanted to join the sports department. They didn't have any openings my sophomore year. My junior year, I joined, started doing play-by-play, fell in love with that. When it came time to apply to college, I decided I wanted to go to Syracuse, knowing how great their sports broadcasting program is. And
Pretty good alumni base there for sure.
their track record for pumping out broadcasters like a factory. And when I got in, there was no other place I wanted to go. And had a great 4 years there. And that the interest became a passion when I got to Syracuse. And then I was lucky enough to then parlay that into a career. So that's how I got here.
It's been awesome. I think you kind of hear that story a lot. It's like you kind of start off doing something different. You find that love and passion for sports, and then you end up kind of finding what you want to do with your career at that point. Because you mentioned you started by doing play-by-play, and as someone who is in the sports broadcasting world, play-by-play and anchoring, two completely different skill sets. How important is versatility when you were trying to target this industry?
Incredibly important. I went to Syracuse with a focus on doing play-by-play. It's the only thing I was interested in when I was in high school. I played the saxophone for 9 years, hated that. Play-by-play was the only thing. It actually got me out of marching band too, which is one of the reasons I joined. But it was the only thing I was really interested in. We didn't have a TV station in high school, so I didn't start doing TV stuff until I got to Syracuse. And I wanted to dip my feet into as many different pools as I could. I didn't know that I would end up in the local news circuit. I figured that when I got to Syracuse, when I started doing play-by-play, that's the trajectory that I would be on. I graduated in 2020 when there were no jobs because of COVID. And uh, and so I played the hand that was dealt, and I was lucky enough to land in Huntsville, Alabama, doing local news. And so you don't know um, where you'll end up. And
Right.
so to be as versatile as possible is you best position yourself to land a good job. So I made sure that when I was at Syracuse, I could do as many things as possible, and I'm grateful I did. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely, because I think versatility is so key. You never know what route you are going to go into with your career in this media space. As you just mentioned, you end up going into anchoring. You're having a lot of success with it. Now, what I find so interesting about your job as a Connecticut sports anchor is Connecticut is a state that's kind of sandwiched between the New York and Boston markets. There's only the Connecticut Sun at a professional level. There's no professional teams in the four major U.S. sports. Again, you're kind of sandwiched between these two markets. How does Connecticut's lack of representation in the most popular sports in the country affect the way that you cover your stories and the way you cover state sports in the state as a whole?
That's an interesting question, Chase. And you know it well, having grown up in this
Right.
state. Um, you know, it is an interesting and a special state to be in because you are sandwiched in between two of the largest markets for sports in Boston and New York. And there are a lot of Patriots fans, there are a lot of Yankees fans, there are a lot of Red Sox fans. Um, but there are also a lot of UConn fans, and you don't get UConn coverage anywhere else to the extent that you do with us and in this state with the local news circuit. And so our primary focus during the college season is everything UConn Huskies. And then, of course, the Connecticut Sun and the WNBA as a whole is on a rise, and pretty rapidly at that. So the last couple of years, our coverage of the Connecticut Sun has generated a lot of interest, and that's very cool too. So there's no shortage of content being in this state, that's for sure. And we're very lucky to be sandwiched in between Boston and New York, because there there are so many. It almost seems like there's just never a slow period, which is amazing. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of markets where you can't find that. So I'm very grateful to be in this market, and it's a challenge to cover everything. It's really hard. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question at all, but and
No,
if it
no,
didn't,
100%. You kind of take more of like take more of the collegiate perspective, because I know last year I was reporting on it. I think there were 5 or 6 teams in either the men's or women's college basketball NCAA tournaments. So this is more of like a college state compared to a professional state. We're going to kind of break down if Connecticut could ever get a professional team, when they did have a professional team, stuff like that. But this is more of a college state. But I have to ask you, because you mentioned you're not going to get UConn coverage anywhere else, and it's a fair point, because they're not going to talk about it in Boston. They're not going to talk about it in New York. They already have too much to talk about with all of their sports, especially New York. They have essentially 2 teams for each sport. So obviously, that's very tough for them. You mentioned there's not really a slow period. Maybe during those slight slow periods, maybe between the Sun and the Huskies, or if the Sun are having a slow start, or if a team's not good, like how much of your work does actually cater to the Boston and New York markets in a sense?
it's a case by case. It really depends on what stories there are to cover. I'm not traveling a whole lot to Fenway, to TD Garden. The last time I was at TD Garden was for the Connecticut Sun when they played a Boston game, and so we have a lot to cover in this state. That it and it's good that we do. So the slowest period we had, I would say, it was like the middle of July this past year. From the middle of July to the middle of August, the Connecticut Sun were on hiatus because of the Olympics, and so we had the Hartford Yard Goats, as you know, our minor league baseball
Correct.
team, our AA team. Um, we had the Hartford Athletic, which is a professional soccer team. But outside of those two things, there wasn't much else going on, and so it's a good time to take vacation. That's for sure. But also, those are also the times where you focus on the things that aren't getting as much recognition, and we try to give those things coverage. So, so yeah.
Yeah, there are actually a lot of high level minor league teams, whether that be in baseball or hockey, and the AHL team, the Bridgeport Islanders as well, formerly the Sound Tigers. I'm sure there could be some coverage along those lines, not in the middle of July, but just in general, maybe when there is a slow period, kind of focusing on that minor league level. And now, kind of going back to yourself when it comes to a broadcasting standpoint, you won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Sports Reporter in the Boston, New England region. How does it feel to be recognized in that way? And I kind of want to talk about this as well. You graduated college, you mentioned, during the pandemic, 2020. That wasn't a long time ago, and already you're winning Outstanding Sports Reporter in such a big market. How were you able to have that kind of success? How did it feel to get recognition for that success at such a young age?
Oh my goodness. Well, it was unexpected, that's for sure. I was just excited to be nominated, to be in a room filled with so many talented people. I was lucky enough to be nominated for 3 Emmys that night, and I was so nervous too. I didn't want to get up on stage and give an acceptance speech. I remember not being able to eat anything that day, but it was really cool hearing my name called. And it's affirmation. It's validation that the work that I know is good, and people seem to enjoy, is that it's getting recognized. So yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It was unexpected and very humbling. That's for sure.
Yeah, so many big reporters in this market, you were able to get that. I'm sure that did feel
Yeah.
honoring in a way, especially at this stage of your career. You usually think that would be something you win when you're in your 40s or 50s, but to win that so early, I'm sure kind of added on to how happy I'm sure you felt and how just excited I'm sure you felt in the moment. That's something you dream of. Like as a aspiring sports reporter, you dream of going up on stage and winning an award like that. So the fact that you were able to do that is amazing. You do it for your work in Connecticut. We've been talking about this entire time how Connecticut doesn't have a major four major U.S. sports professional team. Well, Connecticut tried to add a new NHL team. Obviously, you had the fan favorite Hartford Whalers that the Connecticut and even just NHL fans across the country still love. They're one of the most popular, like vintage hats in all those stores. But they moved to Carolina in 1997. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont said he had significant interest and was involved in meetings about possibly getting the Arizona Coyotes. Now, obviously, that didn't happen. He wanted them to play in Hartford at the XL Center. Instead, they moved to Utah. What would a professional hockey team have done for the state of Connecticut? And from what you were hearing, did it seem realistic or possible that the Coyotes were going to make the trip to Connecticut?
I don't know where they would have played. Uh, would they have played at the XL Center in Hartford?
I guess that was his argument. Yeah.
Where the Wolfpack play? Yeah, I mean, I think the first. Well, I don't know what the order of events should have been, but my curiosity would be where they would play, the logistics behind that, as much as the financial aspect. But I'll say this: there's a pretty pretty big hockey fan base in Hartford. We cover the Wolfpack pretty extensively. It's right in our backyard, and so we do a lot with the Hartford Wolfpack. They have passionate fans. The Bridgeport Islanders are great. So, I mean, as somebody, I'll ask you, Chase, as somebody who grew up in Connecticut, how much would you love to see a professional hockey team here?
I would love it. I mean, my dad grew up in the, Baltimore, DC area, so it wouldn't be the team that I would, I guess I'd say, adopt for my sports passion, but I think just having it locally, like I feel like Connecticut, you mentioned kind of the benefits of being sandwiched between Boston and New York at times, but I feel like it also makes Connecticut a little more meaningless in a sense at times when you look at the professional sports area. When UConn isn't playing, when UConn isn't winning national championships, Connecticut isn't mentioned as much. And I feel like to have Connecticut representation would have been great. But I mean, as someone who's been at the XL Center, I think it could use some renovations. And I think I could understand why the Coyotes ownership and why the NHL, maybe that wouldn't be their first choice. And I think the whole thing just happened so quickly because they said, okay, Utah. And then all of a sudden they were like gone. It was like over. It reminded me a lot like the Baltimore Colts back in like the 1970s or 80s. Like it was just like right on the spot. It just happened. All of a sudden you're spotted to Utah and that's it. But I feel like I think Connecticut could have prepared a little bit more for it. And I am curious, you never know when the next relocation is going to happen. But if they now make those renovations to the stadium, hoping that will convince a different ownership group to move, I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on that as well, because I feel like the XL Center, it's like, yes, it's, the Huskies play there every now and then, but it's also not like the stadium you may want for one of 32 professional hockey teams.
Yeah, yeah, and it's in a weird spot too, where it's right smack in the middle of downtown Hartford.
Right.
So, you have parking garages, but parking often is a nightmare. So if that ends up being the venue to house an NHL team, I agree with you. I think there's some work to be done. Um, but I think there are fans that already are are here in place who have been waiting for an NHL team to come back since the Whalers left, who would welcome another team in Connecticut. Um, and I'd be really interested to see what new fans come and what fans return from the Whalers days. That would be the thing I would be most interested in if it ever materialized.
Right. Most markets do recover, but I mean, being a Baltimore sports fan, I know a few people who still haven't really recovered from the loss of the Baltimore Colts. And as
Mm.
successful and as dominant as the Ravens have been, and even though they've been around now for close to 30 years, there's still a place in their heart for the Colts, and it just hasn't really gone away. And so I think that is something to think about as well. And I think another problem with it is Connecticut kind of being, I know I keep saying it's sandwich or smack between Massachusetts and New York. Part of the problem is if you're a league, you're going to try to get audience all across the country, not in just one individual market. That's why I'm sure the MLB was happy it wasn't a Subway Series and that they got both LA and New York, two different sides of the country, because Subway Series ratings wouldn't have been good and kind of that western part of the United States. But I just feel like if you put a team in Connecticut, you also have to think about what benefit does the league get? And I guess that brings up an interesting question. If it isn't a hockey team, is it realistic for another team to come to Connecticut, considering it may not really entice a league that much and may not entice an owner either who may want to kind of take this on and kind of be the younger brothers to Boston and New York?
Well, first off, as a Mets fan, I was rooting for a Subway Series.
I mean, it was a fun year. I mean, I'm sure it
Yeah.
was for you guys. Just as a Mets fan, I was there multiple times. What an electric environment it is at Citi Field.
Were you there for a playoff game?
I was not there for a playoff game, but I was there for 2 regular season games, and they both felt like playoff games. So it's just that entire environment is so electric.
Dude, to go from where this team was at 11 games under 500 in May to the run that they went on, I've never experienced that as a fan of any sport. When the season ended, the last thing I felt was disappointment. I was just so proud of that team and excited for the future. The question was about being sandwiched in between New York and Boston.
Right, and like any other, if like an owner in any other sport would kind of be enticed to move there and be in between those markets, maybe that would pursue owners to stay away from moving to Connecticut.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And being in Utah, geographically, there aren't as many competing markets as close in a vicinity as you would have if you moved to Connecticut. And the benefit of the Connecticut Sun is there is no competing Boston WNBA team.
Right.
New York doesn't really have, I mean, outside of Syracuse, New York doesn't really have a college program that it rallies around. Like I grew up
In
on Long
Syracuse, I
Island,
feel like I don't consider in that like market. I feel like it's
and
kind of
that's
like
the
its
thing.
own separate thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and I grew up on Long Island. I cared about Syracuse mainly because my mom went to Syracuse. And then I ended up going to Syracuse. But we didn't have, like, I grew up watching professional sports. We didn't really care that much just as a region about college sports, as much as people in Connecticut care about UConn. So UConn's kind of they have their own monopoly where they are geographically. The Connecticut Sun are the same way, in a way where the Hartford Whalers didn't. And if an NHL team came back, they wouldn't. Or if an NBA team arrived in Connecticut, they wouldn't. So yeah, that's an interesting point. It's a cool feeling being a younger brother, as somebody who grew up rooting for the Mets and the Jets, and had.
I'm so sorry about the Jets. I really am. It's just I have a good friend who's a Jets fan. I wrote him the other day, and he didn't even have words to describe his pain.
And then Joe Douglas gets let go today, which
Right. I don't know if you saw the report as well. This just said Rodgers is not coming back in 2025. I heard so that
yeah,
that fell apart quickly. I feel like Devontae Adams, and now this. It's like, look at how much can change in a month.
It's a mess, and I'm not really sure. Not that they pay me to make these decisions, but not really sure where to go from here. And they've had one winning season since 2010, and that season we didn't even make the playoffs. So it's been a long time since we've had anything to root for. But but there is something cool, and we evidenced by this Mets season. There's something cool about being the little brother, the team that doesn't get as much recognition, because when you're good and it happens, there are a lot of people that come out of the woodwork and root for you. So So there is something exciting about that, but I could see why that would deter an ownership group from moving to this geographic location.
One of the points you made there is how it's the exact opposite for the Connecticut Sun. Yes, the Liberty, but no Boston team kind of competing with them. So it kind of allows them to have their own market. That is the main professional team in this state. It is the Connecticut Sun of the WNBA. They made the semifinal in this past season, so they've been pretty successful. And you kind of mentioned it earlier. This is a rapidly growing sport in the WNBA and just women's basketball in general. After the impact that Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese made in women's college basketball and then transfer that over to professional women's basketball. How has the Suns' involvement in this rapidly growing sport kind of created a new culture for Connecticut sports fans?
Yeah. The Sun deserve much more recognition than they've gotten. They've been consistently, now they've never won a title. They've gotten there several times, and they've been consistently just very good. Getting to the postseason every year, getting to the semifinals almost every year. Like, they're just really good and really consistent, and they just play really solid basketball, sort of like the Spurs in the Tim Duncan, Manu
Right.
Ginobili, Tony Parker era.
Like they're just never bad. They're always there. Like,
And I mean, they're not winning titles at the rate that the Spurs were, but they're just consistently winning. They have this core in place that's exciting, and they've played so many games together that it's just I find it a really relaxing form of basketball to watch. And they play tough defense too. So all that said, they now that people are paying attention a little bit more, the Caitlin Clark effect of it all, the Connecticut Sun have been shown the spotlight in a way that they weren't previously, and that's a really rewarding thing to see, because they've earned that. They've earned that spot in the Sun. No pun intended.
literally.
I'm also interested to see where they go from here. Now, their coach is now coaching the Indiana Fever. Stephanie White, who grew up in Indiana and went to Purdue and coached the Fever previously. Now she's going to coach Caitlin Clark in the Fever. But I hope this isn't, and I don't expect this to be a phase or a fad. I hope this new fan base that's interested in the WNBA and maybe came and started watching because of Caitlin Clark, I hope they're here to stay.
Right.
And they are going to pay attention, and then more people are going to come as a result. So I'm interested to see how this grows and how fast it grows, because nothing like this has occurred that to the extent that this has happened. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's occurred like this in my lifetime with a professional sports organization.
Yeah. It's hard to think of as well. I've had this
Yeah.
conversation with many college reporters. Like, is the overall success of women's basketball last year, from a ratings perspective, almost as much as men's basketball? Are they going to be able to sustain that or something close to it? Or is the whole Caitlin Clark hype going to wear down? I think it's a question we're asking both for college basketball and for the WNBA.
Yeah, I think it's on now the league to embrace the new fandom and figure out how to properly market themselves. They've started doing a good job with it. And when you have a rapid growing fan base or more eyeballs on you, then it's on you to continue that and to continue the expansion of it all. So then it's on marketing. How do you market yourself? How do you generate even more interest, and keep the people who are interested for whatever reason they're interested? How do you keep that? So that's on the league now, and then hopefully they can continue to grow.
We will definitely have to see what happens. We talked about at the beginning, this is a college town. We actually spoke off the camera before. You kind of came to Connecticut with this role during the perfect time of the fall of 2022, because now you've been able to witness the last two back-to-back national championships from the UConn Huskies men's basketball team. It's been a very, very dominant run. Now, look, Connecticut may not be known for professional sports, but they're considered the basketball capital of the world due to the fact that not only is their men's program so great, but the women's program might be the most dominant program in the history of collegiate athletics. Both are two of the greatest ever in collegiate athletics. You've covered the national championships. You've covered a women's Final Four. What stands out from those programs? What makes them so dominant and so successful year after year? And I get you've only seen 2 seasons. This is your third. But I'm sure with those 2 programs, it's very easy to see how success comes.
Well, with the men's team, it's the culture. And that's something that Coach Hurley and his coaching staff, Luke Murray, Kamani Young, Tom Moore, they've created this culture that in the most simple way possible that you could describe it as just a winning culture. And they bring in these people. And I asked Coach Hurley about this a few weeks ago, about recruiting and identifying certain aspects of a recruit that are intangible. How do you find somebody that you think will fit your culture? And he said, it's just a matter of paying attention. And it's the little things. Are they on their phone? Are you paying attention with what they're doing on the court, how they're interacting with people? And then, of course, their upbringing plays a role in it as well. And so you look at somebody like Cam Spencer last year, who wasn't a recruit at high school for UConn, but he came over from Rutgers and was just a perfect fit. He just fit in with the identity of this basketball team. And you need guys like that who buy in. And it's, of course, easier to buy in when you're winning games. But Coach Hurley he's intense in practice. But he now has a proven track record, and he and his coaching staff have figured out the right recipe of character to bring in. And so that's incredibly important.
He has himself a spot in Springfield for sure after these 2 national championships.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So that's on the men's side. And then on the women's side, I mean, it's just, if you're a high school basketball player, a women's basketball player, why wouldn't you want to play for Gino Auriemma? I mean, it's the opportunity to play for a legend. It would be like a high school football player playing for Nick Saban, or, it's those opportunities aren't going to be there for that much longer. And Sarah Strong, for instance, who's going to have a tremendous season, freshman on the UConn basketball team, top ranked recruit coming out of high school. I think it was her who was asked. Maybe it was Caitlin Chen, one of the new players. Either way, you walk into the UConn facility and you just look up and you see Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi and all of these, Maya Moore, all of these amazing UConn legends who have walked through this building, who are just some of the greatest to ever do it. They started their careers there. You could say the same about the men's side, but not to the extent as the women's side.
Of course.
And so it's just, it's like starting your career in Springfield, right? You just walk in and you're like, oh my God, this is where this Hall of Famer played. This could be me one day. So there's that aspect of it. And then of course, it sort of like, and not that I'm comparing myself to this, but it's one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to go to Syracuse for sports broadcasting. Marv Albert, Mike Tirico, Bob Costas went there. I know that I knew that if I dedicated myself to this craft, that I would come out better than when I entered. And that was the right place for me. So I can only imagine how a UConn or a women's basketball player, when they step foot at UConn, feels if they love basketball. I mean, I'm sure they have a similar feeling.
What a great college athletics program. We've even seen the UConn football team. I cover them a lot on the website, The League Winners. I'm a writer for them covering UConn football, and what a season it's been for them, even as well. I feel like UConn athletics is in a really, really good spot, and I feel like they always will be, and they'll always have 17 combined national championships, maybe even more. Dan Hurley and that crew is trying to do something that hasn't been done since UCLA in the 1970s, capturing that three-peat, maybe even more, but at least for now, 17, and I guess you can put the plus sign on national championships. And you're right, the recruiting pitch is easy, both on the men's and the women's side. Look, Jonah, you've had the opportunity to cover these national championships, Final Fours. You've won an Emmy. You've done so many great things. You come from Syracuse, one of the top broadcasting schools. You've already done so much. There are so many people listening to this, aspiring broadcasters, who would love to be in the position like you, and lead sports anchor for Fox 61, covering these incredible teams, having this incredible career. What would be your key piece of advice to them, and why?
You hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned versatility. If you're an aspiring broadcaster, there are so many avenues to go now. If you want to pursue sports in any media capacity, if you have the ability to try your hand at as many different things as possible, if you have resources at your disposal to do different things and to learn, take advantage of that. Because you don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know who you're going to meet, who's going to offer you a job, who's going to shake your hand and say, hey, you're really good at this. You don't know what's going to come down the line. And so if you can best position yourself to be as good at as many things as possible, you're going to be in a good spot. Opportunities pop up because of who you know and because of timing. But while you can't control the timing thing, you can control certainly who you know. And that's a key piece of it too, is to meet people, get out there, shake people's hand, network, but also learn as much as you can, be a sponge, get feedback, and also be humble. I mean, humility is such a huge part of this business. And if you accept the fact that there are so many things that you don't know, and you're willing to learn, then you're only going to get that much better. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to learn a lot, be coachable, and just be a good person, because people like working with good people. So,
Jonah, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for coming on the show today. Many great things to talk about when it comes to Connecticut sports, and many great things to talk about with your already successful career. Jonah, we appreciate you coming on, and this is awesome. We wish you the best of luck with all your work.
thank you so much, Chase. This was great.
This was awesome. Huskies chasing history, Connecticut Sun, the consistent, like the Pittsburgh Steelers of the WNBA. It has said so many great things that you do cover. We'll be sure to check it out, guys. The links to all of Jonah's work, if you want to check it out, is in the description. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode alongside Fox 61 sports anchor Jonah Karp. I'm your host, Chase Coburn. We'll see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.